And the case just needs to be swabbed with naphtha inside and out to remove any contaminants, dust, dirt, oils, anything you don't like the look of really. And once you're done, it's important to sort of blow any loose fibres of cotton away which tend to gather. Now on this case I can see that there's actually a piece of yarn in here as a light seal, and that must come up against this tube here. It would do. That's unusual. Normally there's nothing in that groove on a shutter. I'm not convinced it would make an awful lot of difference. I think that generally with other manufacturers they would see to it that this tube came somewhere around that case on the back so that this effectively fitted into it, and then of course there'd be no light path or leaks. But all that aside, that's fine. I'm just making sure that that yarn stays in place. And that case appears to have cleaned up well. There wasn't an awful lot of dirt come off on there, and I'm just going around for a second time just to make sure I've got everything out of there. There's a detent spring in here that acts as a detent on the position of the flash sink lever. That's usually got a touch of graphite grease or something similar on there, and I'm just cleaning that away at the moment because I will lubricate that when I put this back together. That looks good. I'll just use my puffer to make sure I puff away any threads of cotton that have come off those cotton buds or Q-tips. Right, well I'll pop that case to one side. I want to look at this plate now, and I just need a bin to throw those cotton buds in as they get dirty. This plate was a little bit marked, nothing serious. I'm just giving it a wipe to see if those marks wipe off or whether they're corrosion spots. They're not really wiping off. A little bit of dirt coming off there. You can tell if there's a problem. Surface corrosion is not uncommon on a plate like this. You can tell if it's possibly going to present a problem if, as you run the cotton bud over it, if it feels rough, then it means that the surface is not dead smooth, and then the shutter blades may not travel across it as quickly as they might do had it been dead smooth, in which case you might want to polish this piece with some Brasso. But this, I'm not feeling anything here, so I'm not going to bother with that. And the back of the plate, I need to do nothing here really except make sure that any oil contamination is removed. This side's probably not been untouched by human hands for the last 60 years, and it's not really showing many marks. There's a fingerprint here, that'll be from when the shutter was first assembled, and it's just because someone's picked it up, and your perspiration will, the salts and so forth in your perspiration and the oils, they'll etch into the surface given enough time. That looks fine. I'll pop that to one side of the case, and it's 3 small screws. I'll screw those back together in a minute. Let's have a look at this lens tube. Just cleaning around the outside edge where the blade actuating ring runs to remove that old grease and so forth. And wipe the inside. That's coming up pretty well. There's cotton buds coming off fairly marked, but that's because of the graphite grease, I'd say. or whatever had been used on there. That looks good. The blade actuating ring. Yeah, that's a bit marked. It's pretty dirty. That's just dried grease. If the blade actuating ring is sticky, it doesn't want to move round the lens tube. Effectively, there's too much. If the grease or whatever lubricant's on there is too viscous, it doesn't want to shear and the part won't move promptly. And if you're at the soft end of the spring where the blades are almost but not quite closed, there'll be insufficient spring tension to actually pull the blade actuating ring around. And so the shutter blades won't get parked in the blade's closed position properly. Yeah, certainly a bit of filth coming off there. This piece is a spring steel, high carbon steel of some sort. I've not found them to be prone to corrosion to any great extent. It's not really a problem with them. I can only put that down to the fact that they've probably got enough oil and grease running around on them that it protects the surfaces from corrosion. That looks good. That'll be fine. And the mechanism plate. Well, this top surface here, that's the blade actuating ring runs on that surface. This sort of staining is old dry grease, or oils have done that. This little catch here holds the self-timer, the delay action, in position. There's a detent spring here for the blade actuating ring, which tends to bias it towards fully open or fully closed. You can tell when you've cleaned these things enough because you're not getting any more dirt off on your cotton bud. This face is where the shutter blades run, so it's important that that face is absolutely clean. Now that pallet I felt wasn't moving particularly smoothly. I'm just going to put a drop of naphtha behind that in case there's some dried oil or something behind it, and I'll just blow that out. So the naphtha will dissolve any oils and carry them away with it. That seems to be, yeah, that's what I'd expect now. That's nice and free. The pallets have to rattle backwards and forwards at very high speed as the pallet wheel is driven, and that thing sets the delay. When the flash sink is set to the M position. That's used for flash bulbs. Basically, first the flash is ignited and then the shutter opens. And it's to give the flash bulbs time to burn at peak brilliance for your exposure. With electronic flash, the flash is only ignited when the blades reach the fully open position, not before the shutter starts to open. Okay, well that's all good. That's fine. I'll give that one more wipe over and then I can put the blade actuating ring and lens tube back on there. So getting this in position, I've got to hook that underneath that detent spring. Drop this into place. Like so. And get my detent spring stretched out and over the post on the blade actuating ring. And the lens tube goes on, and it only goes on in one position. One of these posts is chewed off at the edge, and that's where it comes up against this pin, and that's where the bracket goes. Now my 3 screws, one of them, as I said, is longer than the other 2 by about 1/4 millimetre or so. It's that one down there. And the long screw holds the bracket. There's the bracket that goes over that pin. I'll nip those 3 screws up. And check that the blade actuating ring moves smoothly, making sure that the various catches here and here and here are back out of the way so they're not stopping this from moving. That moves freely. Just a bit of thread of cotton there, I'm just removing that. And you can possibly see that detent spring there operating. You can see how it's in the fully open, the fully closed position there, and the fully open position there. You can see it tends to latch back in the fully closed position. That's good. Alright, well I want to lubricate the blade actuating ring here with a bit of graphite powder. I don't typically use a paste like molybdenum paste or graphite grease or anything in there, because graphite grease, and particularly the oils that the graphite's suspended in, tend to dry out over time and it can get sticky and gather dust too. So graphite graphite powder I normally use to lubricate that, which I will do next. Right, I'll just pop a bit of graphite powder on the mechanism plate and just work that backwards and forwards. Where's the piece I normally get onto? And I usually just do that in this container because I can reuse that graphite powder. I just pick it up with the tweezers and drop it where I need it to be, and you'll see me doing that shortly. I'm just working that graphite powder in. Once I'm happy that that's all done, I just got to blow that out. So, well, that's all done. Quite happy with the state of that. And that mechanism plate is ready now for me to put the blades back on. But first of all, I've got to clean these blades. Now, let's take one of these blades at random. This is blade number 3. Have a look at this. I'm looking at this, I'm catching the reflected light from the window here because it makes it easier to judge the surface imperfections on this blade, and it's quite marked. So I'm going to clean that with a bit of naphtha and see if it improves. In other words, I want to see whether the marks I'm seeing are contaminations on the surface that will clean away, or whether it's corrosion of the surface, which of course will not clean away. And the most of these marks are staying exactly where they were. I don't know whether you can see any of that on the camera. There's certainly surface marks on that blade. I'll see what the other face looks like. Of course, the blades are not smooth and free from surface imperfections. They won't move smoothly over each other. Yeah, that side of the blade's worse. So these blades certainly need to be polished, and I polish them with Brasso typically. So I will find the Brasso. Alright, with a bit of Brasso here, or just this wonderful stuff. I'll get some on a piece of cloth, and I've just got a piece of old t-shirt here over this block to work on, and I'm using a cotton bud to hold the blade in position so that it doesn't shift. And I need to polish both surfaces of the blade. Got to be careful doing this, not to catch your cleaning cloth on the edge of the blade and buckle the blade up, because if you get a buckle in the blade, you will have one hell of a time trying to straighten it out. That seems good. Yeah, I'll see if that will polish off. That looks good. Right, now that blade, I will clean that with some naphtha and see what sort of result I get. Yeah, I'm very pleased with that. I'll just clean that on a piece of tissue. Guess you can never find one when you want one. That's what I'm looking for. It's a nice Kodak 18% grey tissue. And cleaning it with naphtha after you've polished it is essential because it removes traces of the polish and any wax the polish might have had in it. Now that blade, I'll hold that up to the light so you can get a better impression. That blade is great. That's just like a new blade now. Those surface marks are all gone. That's exactly as it should be. So that's smooth, clean, free from marks. And basically I've just got to clean the other 5 blades in exactly the same way. And then the shutter, I can put the blades in place on the mechanism plate and move on. Right, let's put this plate back into the shutter case here. This only goes in one position, but finding the right position is always entertaining. I suppose I should have marked it first if I'd wanted to. And it ain't there, and it ain't there. It's there. And I can tell because all the through holes in the mechanism plate, I can see straight through them. Get these 3 small screws in place. Once they're all in place, they can be done up tight. Be careful with these screws because if you don't want to mutilate the screw heads. If you mutilate the screw heads and a little thread of metal is sticking up, it could catch on the shutter blades and prevent the shutter from working correctly. So good screwdrivers and good technique is required. Yeah, that plate's back in. Quite happy with the state of that. Back to the mechanism plate. So I'll set this in the blade's open position, which is bringing this arm across to the post there. And I can start putting the blades back in place. And the blades start in which position? Here. The second blade comes up against that hole there where the pin comes through the drive cocking shaft, and this blade has a steep cutout in the back to clear that shaft. If you put that in the wrong place, you'll end up with a shutter that will not open fully and therefore will not cycle, and will inevitably, the likelihood of damage to the blades are very high if you start pushing and pulling things to make it cycle. So there's our 5 normal blades, if you like, and then the cover blade, which is a very small blade, goes over the first blade. And the cover blade's job is to stop the possibility of light rays penetrating the closed shutter obliquely, which is only something that can really happen when the lens is removed from the camera. So it's quite a common practice when shutters have removable lenses, and it's not a common practice when they don't. Right, so the shutter case can go back over that mechanism plate now. It only goes on in one position. And I might swing that blade actuating ring round slightly so the edges of the blades are in from the edge of the case here. And I'm less likely to tip them off accidentally. Let's see if I can move this blade actuating ring slightly. That's enough. Of course the detent's on there, it'll want to spring it away into the other position if I'm not careful. Then the case goes on. It only goes on in one position, and that one position is about here. Let's see a thread of something there, what's that? Bit of dust. Check that these screw holes are lined up, and they are. Got 3 countersunk head screws that go in here and hold this together. And I'm doing these screws up very lightly indeed because I don't want to risk damaging the blades if one of the blades has moved away from its position while I was putting the case over. So let's see if this will close. There you are, the shutter's opening and closing normally, the blades are all good, everything's in position. And I can tighten those 3 case screws up. And that part of the job is done.